There are moments in sports when a player wins a match, lifts a trophy, or breaks a record, and everyone understands immediately why the moment matters. And then there are moments that feel different, moments where nothing needs to be won, for the significance to be enormous. Moments where simply walking onto the court tells the world that a player has reached a place she once could only dream about. And that is exactly why Alex Eala's arrival at the Stars of the Open in Arthur Ashe Stadium carries a meaning far greater than an ordinary exhibition appearance. A 21-year-old from the Philippines, standing inside the largest tennis stadium in the world, surrounded by some of the most exciting young names in professional tennis, was no longer being introduced as a player waiting for her breakthrough. She was being presented as part of the future of the sport itself. The setting alone was extraordinary. Arthur Ashe Stadium, with its 23,000 seats, is where tennis history is made, where legends have created unforgettable moments, where the world's biggest names compete under the brightest lights. And now, Alex Eala was stepping into that same spotlight. But what made the moment even more powerful was everything that had happened before she reached this stage. Not long ago, Eala was still fighting her way into major tournaments, trying to prove that a young player from the Philippines could compete with the best in the world. Now she was arriving in New York as a career-high world number 18, the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history, and one of the young stars chosen to headline the Stars of the Open. That transformation is the real story. Because when Eala walked into this enormous stage, she wasn't simply arriving at an event. She was arriving at a new level of her career. And at first glance, the Stars of the Open might have looked like just another exhibition, designed to entertain fans before the US Open main draw began. But look closer, and the significance becomes much bigger. The 2026 edition brought together four of the most exciting young players in tennis: Alex Eala, Brazilian sensation João Fonseca, American prodigy Iva Jovic, and American rising star Lerner Tien. All four were 21 or younger, and all four had already achieved milestones that made the tennis world take notice. This was not a random collection of players. It was a showcase of the generation that could define the sport's next era, and Eala was right there in the middle of it. That alone says something about how dramatically her status had changed. The US Open had recognized that her rise was not simply about rankings. It was about the connection she had built with fans, particularly Filipino supporters who had transformed her appearances into celebrations of national pride. For thousands of Filipino fans, seeing Eala inside Arthur Ashe Stadium represented something much bigger than watching an exhibition. It meant seeing one of their own, represented on one of the greatest stages in tennis. Imagine what that scene looked like. Thousands of fans, Philippine flags waving through the stands, voices calling Eala's name, and a young player who had spent years chasing opportunities, now standing beneath the lights of the world's biggest tennis stadium. That is why the word arrival matters so much here. She had not simply arrived in New York, she had arrived in the consciousness of the global tennis audience. The timing could hardly have been more dramatic. The Stars of the Open was scheduled for August 27, 2026, at 6 p.m., during US Open Fan Week, just days before the main draw of the tournament would begin. And for Eala, that meant the exhibition carried an unusual kind of pressure, even without ranking points on the line. There was no Grand Slam trophy waiting at the end of the night. There were no ranking points to defend. But there was something else: attention. Arthur Ashe Stadium was giving her a platform where every movement could be seen, every reaction could be amplified, and every moment could become part of the story surrounding her upcoming US Open campaign. This was a chance to show the world that her rise was not a temporary headline, it was a new reality. And standing across the court was someone who made the story even more compelling. Iva Jovic, the 18-year-old American prodigy ranked world number 16, was not simply another opponent. She was one of Eala's friends on tour. The two had known each other since the 2022 US Open, when Eala won the girls' singles title and also competed in doubles against Jovic and Shannon Lamb. Their relationship had developed over the years as they traveled, competed, spent time together, and watched each other's careers grow. But friendship disappears for a few hours when the net goes up. And now, in front of thousands of fans inside Arthur Ashe Stadium, two young players who genuinely respected each other were once again preparing to compete. That friendship created another layer of tension. because this was not a simple story of one rising star facing an unfamiliar opponent. Jovic had already beaten Eala twice in 2026, including at the French Open and Queen's Club. Their Queen's Club meeting had ended in a convincing victory for the American, who produced 26 winners while committing only 9 unforced errors. Yet there was no bitterness between them. In fact, Jovic had spoken openly about how difficult it was to play a friend, while making it clear that whatever happened on court stayed on court. After their French Open clash, she even expressed the kind of sentiment that reveals how much their friendship mattered, saying she wished there could have been 2 winners. That makes their meeting at the Stars of the Open more intriguing, not less, because now Eala had another opportunity, not necessarily to settle a rivalry, not to prove that one player was better than the other forever, but to show how far she had come. Every time these 2 young players met, the tennis world got another glimpse at the future. And on this particular night, that future was being displayed inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. But there was another reason this event mattered, and it had nothing to do with rankings or rivalries. The Stars of the Open was also about giving back. A portion of ticket proceeds went toward the USTA Foundation, the charitable arm of the United States Tennis Association, supporting the National Junior Tennis and Learning Network. The initiative uses tennis, academic support, and mentorship to help young people from under-resourced communities. More than 270 organizations are part of that network, providing opportunities for young people to develop both on and off the court. That mission changed the meaning of the event. Fans were not simply buying tickets to watch the next generation of tennis stars. They were participating in an event connected to a larger purpose. And tickets starting at just $30 made the experience accessible to fans who might not normally get the chance to see major tennis talent inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. For Eala, that mattered, because her own rise has always carried a meaning beyond a ranking number. She represents what can happen when a young athlete receives an opportunity, believes in that opportunity, and continues climbing even when the path ahead appears impossibly difficult. Now she was participating in an event designed to help create opportunities for the next generation. In that sense, the story was coming full circle. And then there is the number that changes the entire conversation: 18. Alex Eala entered this stage at a career-high world number 18, making her the highest-ranked Filipino tennis player in WTA history. Think about what that means. A player from a country without the same deep tennis infrastructure as traditional tennis powerhouses had climbed into the upper levels of the world rankings. A player who had once been introduced primarily as a promising junior was now being discussed as one of the most important young names in women's tennis. And her 2026 season had supplied the evidence. She had captured a maiden WTA Tour title in Washington. She had reached the round of 16 at Wimbledon and defeated defending champion Iga Swiatek, according to the supplied account. She had collected 7 victories over top 10 opponents. Each achievement removed another layer of doubt. Was Eala ready for the biggest stages? Could she compete against established stars? Could she handle the pressure? Could she keep improving after the initial breakthrough? The answer was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. She was not merely surviving at this level, she was creating results. That is why her entrance at Arthur Ashe Stadium could feel almost like a coronation. The word sounds dramatic, but it captures the emotional shift surrounding her career. A coronation does not necessarily mean a player has already conquered everything. It means the world has begun treating that player differently. And Eala was being treated differently. The stage was different. The audience was different. The expectations were different. The company she was keeping was different. Fonseca, Jovic, and Tien were not established legends, but they were precisely the kind of young stars the tennis world was watching for the future. João Fonseca, the Brazilian sensation, had already made history as the youngest Brazilian champion on the ATP Tour in the Open era, and had climbed into the world's top 30. Lerner Tien had reached a career-high ranking of 18 and had already produced historic victories of his own. Jovic was one of the youngest players inside the WTA top 20. And then there was Eala, the Filipino breakthrough star whose popularity had begun reaching far beyond the usual tennis audience. Put those names together inside Arthur Ashe Stadium, and the message was obvious. This was a preview of what tennis could look like next. But there was one detail that made Eala's presence especially powerful. She was not simply representing herself. She was carrying the attention of an entire tennis-hungry community. The Filipino community in New York was described as more than 200,000 strong, and their support for Eala had become one of the most recognizable elements of her rise. Philippine flags in the stands transformed the atmosphere. Every time her name was announced, the reaction carried another layer of emotion. For a player, that kind of support can be both inspiring and heavy. Eala herself has acknowledged that there are moments when the attention feels heavy, and other moments when it feels fun, and that she is trying to take it all in. That quote reveals something important about the person behind the headlines. She is still only 21. She is still experiencing moments that are completely new. She is still learning how to carry expectations that have grown faster than anyone could have imagined. Yet she keeps walking forward. And now, she was walking into Arthur Ashe Stadium. This is where the story becomes bigger than one exhibition match. Because the question is no longer simply, can Alex Eala win? The more important question is, what does Alex Eala's presence here tell us about where her career is going? The answer is written into every part of the occasion: the ranking, the crowd, the venue, the lineup, the timing. The recognition from the US Open, the charity mission, the friendship with Jovic, and the fact that a player from the Philippines is now being positioned alongside some of the sport's most exciting young talents. None of those things by themselves guarantees what happens next. But together, they create a powerful picture. Eala has crossed an invisible line. She is no longer waiting for the tennis world to discover her. The tennis world is now waiting to see how far she can go. And that is where the suspense surrounding the US Open begins. Because an exhibition can be fun, emotional, and meaningful, but the main draw is where the real test begins. Arthur Ashe Stadium can create an unforgettable entrance, but Grand Slam tennis demands something different. It demands consistency. It demands physical endurance. It demands the ability to handle pressure after the excitement disappears. Eala can enjoy the roar of Filipino fans, share the court with her friends, and experience the energy of stars of the Open. But eventually, the lights become more serious. Ranking points matter. Matches matter. Draws matter. Every opponent wants the same thing she does. And Eala will have to prove that the player who rose to number 18 belongs there every single week. That is what makes this moment so fascinating. The arrival is spectacular, but what comes after the arrival is the real test. According to the supplied account, Eala was projected to receive the number 15 seed at the US Open, which would represent the highest seeding ever for a Filipino player at a Grand Slam. If that projection holds, the symbolism is enormous. Just 1 year can completely change the trajectory of a career. A player who was once fighting to qualify for main draws can suddenly walk into a Grand Slam as a seeded competitor. That is not a small improvement. That is a transformation. And it explains why the stars of the Open felt different. The exhibition was not creating Eala's rise. It was revealing how far the rise had already gone. The most powerful image, then, is not necessarily a point won or a ball struck. It is Eala, standing on that court and looking around. 23,000 seats. One of the most famous arenas in tennis. Thousands of Filipino supporters. The next generation of stars sharing the stage with her. The US Open just days away. A career-high ranking behind her. A historic WTA title already on her resume. And an entire country watching to see what happens next. That is the moment that turns an ordinary appearance into a milestone. Because sometimes the biggest evidence that a player has arrived is not what she says. It is where she is standing. And there is something else worth remembering. Eala's story did not begin inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. It began much earlier, on smaller courts, in junior competition, in moments when nobody outside her immediate circle knew exactly how far she could go. She became a Grand Slam junior champion. She developed her game. She entered the professional tour. She took losses. She faced players with more experience. She kept climbing. Then came the breakthrough moments. The ranking rose. The victories against top players arrived. The WTA title followed. And suddenly, the same player who once needed opportunities was being given one of the biggest platforms available in tennis. That is why the arrival feels emotional. The stadium is enormous, but the journey that brought her there is even bigger. For Filipino fans, there is an additional layer of pride. Tennis has always had legendary names and dominant nations. But Eala is creating a story that feels uniquely connected to the Philippines. Every ranking milestone becomes a national milestone. Every major victory becomes a shared celebration. Every appearance on a massive international stage becomes proof that Filipino tennis can command attention. And when that player steps onto Arthur Ashe Stadium, the significance extends far beyond one athlete. It becomes a visual representation of possibility. A young Filipino athlete is standing in one of the most famous tennis venues on earth, not as a spectator, not as an unknown qualifier, but as one of the players selected to headline an event showcasing the sport's future. That is why the reaction surrounding Eala's grand arrival can feel so powerful even before the first serious point is played. The spectacle itself becomes part of the story. The crowd becomes part of the story. The flags become part of the story. The friendships become part of the story. The charity mission becomes part of the story. And the looming US Open becomes the final piece of the puzzle. Everything points toward one question: what happens when the exhibition lights disappear and Eala enters the Grand Slam battlefield? Because if the stars of the Open was a celebration of arrival, the US Open is where she has to prove that the arrival was only the beginning. And perhaps that is the most shocking part of the entire story. Not that Alex Eala was invited to play inside Arthur Ashe Stadium. Not that she was surrounded by other rising stars. Not even that thousands of Filipino fans were there to support her. The most remarkable part is how quickly the impossible has started to look normal. A career-high ranking of 18, a WTA title, major wins, a Grand Slam victory over an established champion, according to the supplied account, a growing international following, a projected Grand Slam seed, and now, a place among the young stars chosen to headline the stars of the Open. These are not the achievements of someone waiting for her career to begin. These are the signs of someone whose career is already moving into a completely different chapter. So when Alex Eala walked into Arthur Ashe Stadium, the question was never really whether she belonged there. The fact that she was there was already the answer. The real question was how much bigger this moment could become. Could the energy of New York carry into the US Open? Could the Filipino crowd create another unforgettable atmosphere? Could Eala turn this symbolic arrival into a deep Grand Slam run? Could she continue climbing from number 18 toward the very top of women's tennis? Nobody could know the answer yet, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes the story so compelling. Because sports are not built around guarantees, they are built around possibilities, and Alex Eala has reached a point where the possibility is enormous. The player who once represented a distant dream is now standing inside the biggest stadium in tennis. The young Filipino who had to earn every opportunity is now being placed alongside the names the sport believes could define its future. The crowd that once watched her journey from a distance is now surrounding her in New York. And the world that once asked who Alex Eala was is increasingly asking a much more exciting question. How far can she go? The stars of the Open may have been an exhibition. There may have been no ranking points on the line. There may have been no Grand Slam trophy waiting at the end of the night. But that does not mean the occasion was meaningless. Sometimes an exhibition reveals something that a ranking cannot. It reveals recognition. It reveals popularity. It reveals momentum. It reveals how a player is being positioned by the sport itself. And for Eala, the message was unmistakable. She was not simply another young player trying to break through. She was being placed on a stage with the generation expected to carry tennis forward. That is the true meaning of her grand arrival. Arthur Ashe Stadium did not make Alex Eala a star. Her work made her a star. Her victories made her a star. Her persistence made her a star. Her connection with Filipino fans made her a star. But Arthur Ashe Stadium gave the world a chance to see what that journey now looks like, when the spotlight becomes impossible to ignore. And as the Philippine flags waved, as the crowd reacted, as Eala stood beneath the lights, one thought became impossible to escape. This was no longer about whether she could reach the big stage. She had reached it. Now the world wanted to know what she would do with it. The stars of the Open was the introduction. The US Open was the test. And Alex Eala's next chapter was waiting just beyond those Arthur Ashe Stadium lights. Maybe she would make a deep run. Maybe she would face another established champion. Maybe she would create another historic upset. Maybe she would discover another level of pressure she had never experienced before. Nobody could write that ending in advance. But after everything she had already accomplished, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Alex Eala was no longer knocking on the door of world tennis. She was already inside, and for a young player from the Philippines, standing beneath the lights of Arthur Ashe Stadium, with the biggest tournament of the American summer just days away, that was perhaps the most powerful statement of all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Alex Eala's grand arrival at the Stars of the Open and what this moment represents for her rapidly rising career, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more tennis stories, rising stars, dramatic rivalries, and the biggest moments from the world of professional tennis. And now the question is yours. What do you think Alex Eala will achieve at the US Open? Can she turn this incredible rise into a deep Grand Slam run? Can she continue climbing beyond world number 18 and establish herself among the very best players in women's tennis? Let us know in the comments, because if the Stars of the Open was truly the moment Alex Eala announced that she had arrived, the next chapter could be the one that tells us just how far she is capable of going.